Hey y'all, how we doing? Hello. So, real quick before we get started, we're all family here, right? Sound man, I've got a terrible ring up here. I don't know what it is. I know you're working on it. It's driving me a little crazy, but it's a short drive. Um, Nobody got that. Uh, uh, but we're all family here, right? So can I talk to you about something? Now, ladies, this is not directly related to you or anything that's going on with you tonight. It's more directed to the men because of something I saw a little bit ago. But I think the concept applies to all of us. Um, how many of you appreciate this space that's really dedicated to tribe? Like this whole area, like you get access to all this stuff in here. Like this is y'all's space, right? So like when you appreciate something, you take care of it, right? And you know maybe it's not the shiniest thing in the world, but you respect it, right? So I feel like that's the way most of us feel about it. But just before I got up here, I took a little detour to the little boys' room over here to take care of something, and there was somebody had decided that they did not want the cheese on their burger anymore, and so they left it on the floor in the bathroom. So I'm going to say this because I'm assuming that it wasn't a young lady. So to the young man who decided to leave it on the floor, I'm not going to tell you to get up and do it now, but out of respect for the place, for the time and energy that like Steve puts into this, that Rachel puts into this, out of respect for them, I would ask before you leave tonight that you go in there and you pick it up and you put it in the trash can. Okay? So again, we're all family. Just sometimes family's got to take care of some stuff and make sure everybody's on the same page. All right? Can you take out your Bibles for me? All right. Let me get my slides up here on my phone so I can follow along with what I'm doing. So we're talking about Genesis 45 this week. So we're continuing on with our friend Joseph, right? So in the kids department, we had Walk Through the Bible come for the past 3 weeks, and some of y'all are too cool now. You've probably forgotten about Walk Through the Bible, but there's hand signs for each of the Bible stories or in the Old Testament. So, does anybody remember what the sign is for Joseph? Joseph, right? Extra stuff. So, anyway, so we're still talking about Joseph. In this chapter, just right before, Joseph's brothers come to Egypt. They're there because they're starving. Remember, he had the dream, the vision from God that there was going to be a what? A famine. How long? How long was that going to be? How long was that? 7 years. So there were 7 years of plenty. What did he do during the 7 years of plenty? He stored up so that they would have food for the 7 years of famine. So that came to be known throughout the area. So his brothers, like, we don't have any food to eat here. We got to go somewhere. I hear that they have it over here in Egypt. Let's go see what we can do. So they show up. They don't know it's Joseph, right? They don't recognize him, but he recognizes them. So he finds out what their motives are. He finds out that they kept back his younger brother, Benjamin, right? And he knows that his dad is taking care of him, and that his father's heartbroken. And then he reveals himself, and they find out who he is. So that's where we are now in chapter 45. So I'm going to read through it real quick, and I've got 3 points for you tonight that we'll go through, and then I got a question that will end with some things to think about. Okay? You hang with me? All right. So let's go. Chapter 45. Then Joseph could not control himself before all those who stood by him, and he cried, "Have everyone go out from me." So there was no man with him when Joseph made himself known to his brothers. He wept so loudly that the Egyptians heard it, and the household of Pharaoh heard it. Then Joseph said to his brothers, "I am Joseph. Is my father still alive?" But his brothers could not answer him, for they were dismayed at his presence. Then Joseph said to his brothers, "Please come closer to me." And they came closer, and he said, "I am your brother Joseph, whom you sold into Egypt. Now do not be grieved or angry with yourselves because you sold me here, for God sent me before you to preserve your life. For the famine has been in the land these 2 years, and there are still 5 years in which there will be neither plowing nor harvesting. God sent me before you to preserve you a remnant in the earth, and to keep you alive by a great deliverance. Now therefore it is not you who sent me here, but God. And he has made me a father to Pharaoh, and the Lord of his household, and ruler over all the land of Egypt. Hurry and go up to my father and say to him, 'Thus says your son Joseph, God has made me Lord of all Egypt. Come down to me, do not delay. You shall live in the land of Goshen, and you shall be near me, and your children and your children's children, and your flocks and your herds, and all that you have. There I will also provide for you, for there are still 5 years of famine to come, and you and your household and all that you have would be impoverished. Behold, your eyes see, and the eyes of my brother Benjamin see, that it is my mouth which is speaking to you. Now you must tell my father of all my splendor in Egypt, and all that you have seen, and you must hurry and bring my father down here.' Then he fell on his brother Benjamin's neck and wept, and Benjamin wept on his neck. He kissed all his brothers and wept on them, and afterwards his brothers talked with him. Now, when the news was heard in Pharaoh's house that Joseph's brothers had come, it pleased Pharaoh and his servants. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, 'Say to your brothers, do this, load your beasts and go to the land of Canaan, and take your father and your households and come to me, and I will give you the best of the land of Egypt, and you will eat the fat of the land. Now you are ordered, do this, take your wagons from the land of Egypt for your little ones and for your wives, and bring your father and come. Do not concern yourselves with your goods, for this, the best of all the land of Egypt, is yours.' Then the sons of Israel did so, and Joseph gave them wagons according to the command of Pharaoh, and gave them provisions for the journey." Almost done. To each of them he gave changes of garments, but to Benjamin he gave 300 pieces of silver and 5 changes of garments. To his father he sent as follows: 10 donkeys loaded with the best things of Egypt, and 10 female donkeys loaded with grain and bread and sustenance for his father on the journey. So he sent his brothers away, and as they departed he said to them, "Do not quarrel on the journey." Then they went up from Egypt and came to the land of Canaan to their father Jacob. They told him, saying, "Joseph is still alive, and indeed he is ruler over all the land of Egypt." But he was stunned, for he did not believe them, when they told him all the words of Joseph that he had spoken to them. And when he saw that the wagons that Joseph had sent to carry him, the spirit of their father Jacob revived. Then Israel said, "It is enough. My son Joseph is still alive. I will go and see him before I die." All right. 3 points for tonight. There's purpose in disappointment, and we'll go through these in a second. They'll be up here. There's grace when you need it most, and your obedience to God, your obedience can inspire others. So let's look at our first point. Let me turn it on. Usually it's on. Usually the roadie does that for me, and I don't have to. You know roadie. You know roadie. All right. So there's purpose in the disappointment. So let's look at verses 5 through 7. And now do not be distressed or angry with yourselves, and because you sold me here, for God sent me before you. So remember what all happened to Joseph? What all has happened to Joseph so far over the past couple of weeks we've been reading through his story? He had been sold into slavery. He got out of that, and he was made second in command. Then what happened? Potiphar's wife, he went to prison. And then what happened?
He got second in command at that prison.
Yeah, he got put in charge at that prison. He's been to prison a couple of times. He gets raised up to these positions. He's definitely on a roller coaster, right? Lots of highs, lots of lows. Difficult times in Joseph's life. Anybody here ever had something difficult in your life? Yeah?
Yeah.
Maybe you've been disappointed before. Maybe you've had something that broke your heart happen. Maybe you didn't understand. Maybe you got angry with somebody because of what they did. Or maybe you did something that led to a problem. Maybe you're living in a situation right now that you have no clue what's going on. Your family's being torn apart by something. I want to show you through Scripture that God has a purpose in all that. Maybe you're somebody who is just terrified of the unknown. Maybe you get so anxious, so scared about things. Whatever it is, maybe it's something at school, it's stuff that's going on in the world, maybe it's just some relationship that you have with a family member. You're just so scared, so anxious about something that you can't move sometimes, that you can't get up from where you are, you can't move forward because you're terrified. There's a purpose in all this. Let's look. So why is there disappointment? Why are there hardships? A lot of times when you hear people preach about this stuff, when they talk about it, they call it trials and tribulations. So I found 3 points about why there's disappointment or trials in our lives. The first one is we go through these things, these disappointments, things don't work out. It's all not puppy dogs and rainbows because there's a consequence to sin. It's a result of the fall. The fall, remember when we started out on this journey in Genesis, we learned about who? Adam and Eve, right? They partook in that fruit from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, right? Romans 5:12 reminds us, therefore, just as sin came into the world through one man and death through sin, and so death spread to all men because all sinned. So you may be sitting there and you're like, well, I got this friend. I'm going through all this hard stuff. I've had a lot of disappointment, but, this person over here, they don't seem to have a hard time. Like, maybe seemingly looks like their family is in a good spot. They don't struggle like financially. Maybe they have a lot of friends. They seem to be, got it all together. They do good in school, all that kind of stuff. Everything on the outside looks like it's good in their life. Well, maybe it all is, or perhaps it's what they call a facade. Thank you. A facade means it's like a mask almost. So people sometimes, I liken it to this. You ever seen the pictures that people take with like the filters on their phone? Like whether it's Instagram or whatever, and there's all those filters on their picture, and then you see a real picture of that person, and they look a lot different. Kind of like that. A lot of times for us older crowd, We post all the good stuff on Facebook that's going on. But, 5 minutes before we took that picture to post on Facebook of all the good stuff that happened, our life was in chaos. Say all that to say, you may be going through a big-time struggle right now, but your friend may not be, but the roles will probably reverse at some point. You may be going through the hardest thing you've ever dealt with in your entire life right now, and your friends don't necessarily understand what that's about. But I guarantee you, there's going to be some hard stuff for everybody. The next reason for disappointments and for hardships, it's a tool of sanctification. God uses suffering to develop us into better people, people who can love and enjoy Him forever. Are we good enough to get into heaven just the way that we are? Can we do anything that makes God love us more? What if I gave all the money I had to, let's say, I gave all the money that I have to the church that we sponsor in Lebanon? Is that enough? What if I adopted all of the rescue pets down at the Union County Animal Control Office? I'm a great person, right? I'm a good person, so that counts for a lot, right? I should that there's a check mark beside my name, so I should be able to get in there, right? None of that matters. It's the work that God does through these trials that grows you closer to Him and grows you into the young lady or the young man that He's wanting you to be. Because you're not a finished work. And praise God that we're not a finished work. Because I can look out at some of you right now and I'm like, I'm glad God's not done with you right now. I'm glad God's not done with you. I'm glad He's not done with me. I am 42 years old. I should probably have a walker. But the thing about it is God continues to stretch me and to show me new things about who He is and what He wants to do with me. And a lot of times, for me to understand that, He has to bring me to a place to where I totally understand that it's only through Him and what He does in my life that I can do anything. Now, I've shared with y'all before, a couple years ago, 2021 was probably the hardest year of my life. Lost my job, lost my dad, almost lost my mom. My wife had debilitating back pain that led to surgery, and I didn't know what in the world to do. But God brought me through all that, and through those situations, through those disappointments, through those struggles, I grew in my trust for Him and in my relationship with Him. So thinking about your own situation, what are those things that God is using in your life to knock some of the edges off, to sculpt you into that more finished product that He's trying to make you into? And none of us are ever going to be complete until He calls us home, when we're in heaven. That's when you're made new, and that's when you're complete. But while you're here, there's going to be some stuff to deal with. All right. It's a test of faith. In times of intense pain or turmoil, we're going to have to see where we've placed our hope. What have we placed our hope in? I hope so. I hope that's where you placed it. Here's the book of the Bible you probably don't see very often. Habakkuk 3:18. Yet I will rejoice in the Lord. I will take joy in the God of my salvation. So do you take joy in the God of your salvation when you're going through a hard time? Or do you blame everything that you can point your finger at. Where does your hope lie? What is it that you trust more than God? Do you trust your own abilities? Do you trust in other people? What's your faith in? What I have heard it said a lot of times is wherever you spend most of your time, or however you would answer the question, what do you love the most? That's where your faith lies. So most of us, if we're honest, we'll give the church answer here. That's something that a lot of us are really good at when we're at church, just to give the church answers. But when we get outside, we do things a little differently. But the test here is to say, where is my faith truly at? And God will give us situations to see where our faith really is. Is it in Him, or is it in something else? All right, I think we're on to point 2. So grace when you need it most. All right. What all did his brothers do to him? Y'all remember we talked about it a minute ago. Sold him into slavery. They threw him down in a pit. They were going to kill him. They lied to their daddy and said that he'd been killed. And we don't know what happened to him. Here's what's left of him. Sorry, Dad. They got rid of him because they were jealous of him. So they lied. They sold their brother into slavery. And now they're hungry, they're starving, and they show up and they run into their brother again. So, any of y'all ever lied to somebody and then you showed up the next day and you had to face that person again? So what do you think, if you were one of Joseph's brothers, maybe you were the oldest, I believe the oldest was sort of the ringleader of the whole thing, but you show up and you see Joseph, you don't know him at first, and then he reveals himself to you. What do you think is going to happen to you? Yeah, so we're going to have some conversations. I'm probably going to lose my life. I deserve to die. So this whole grace concept, we've talked a lot about it in Genesis. Steve, it's almost like it's an important concept. It's like God put all these examples of grace in this book because He wanted us to learn something from it. So tell me again, what's grace? Yeah, getting something you didn't deserve. So these dudes definitely deserve some consequences, right? They deserve some justice. But what happens here? He gives them all this food. He gives his youngest brother a bunch of money and a bunch of clothes. He is honoring these people who sought to kill him. All right, got a quote for you. We'll read it through because it's a little heavy duty, so we'll talk about it. Grace as a divine inspiration has been shown to indicate the experience of a spiritual assistance from the divine. Who's the divine? God. That furthers one's emotional and psychological development processes, enhancing self-efficacy. We'll talk about that word in a second, as well as a change of one's worldview. We'll talk about that in a second, to a relatively positive one, all culminated to a transformed self. What in the world does that mean? All right. Let's start. So at the beginning there, it talks about spiritual assistance from the divine. Grace as a divine inspiration. So it's coming from God. So you're exposed to God's grace. It does a couple things in your life. So the first one there, it furthers one's emotional and psychological development processes. So emotionally, you experience grace, and psychologically you experience grace. You start to feel different about what's happening in your life, and you start to think differently about what's happening in your life. Emotional and psychological. So your feelings and what's going on and how you think. Enhancing self-efficacy. So there's a note there about self-efficacy. Self-efficacy is the belief in your ability to complete a task or achieve a goal. So the writer of this particular quote is saying, once you experience God's grace, you start to think differently about your situations, you start to feel differently about your situations, and because you know what his grace feels like, you have more confidence in your ability to walk forward in obedience to his will. I can do that because I know God's grace is sufficient for me. Not because I'm the best at this, or I'm the strongest at this, or I have strengths here, or I'm whatever. Because I know that God will see me through. So all these things that you're going through in your life, and going back to our example of Joseph, he had experienced God's grace in his life so many times that he knew, even sitting in that jail cell for whatever time it was, he knew God's grace would bring him to that place of prominence again. And he ultimately came to that place of prominence in Pharaoh's household where he could help his family, who ultimately needed a whole lot of grace from him. So he had been extended grace from God, which enabled him to give grace to the people who had hurt him most. So your obedience inspires others. This is our third point. So in this one, towards the end in verse 27, they're talking to their daddy, and it says, once he heard about what was going on, he thought that his favorite son was dead, had been dead for a long time. He finds out that he's alive, and not only is he alive, he's in a position of prominence, and he's going to help his family get out of the predicament that they're in. Now, Joseph could have taken a lot different course in his life. When one of those times when he was in jail, he could have said, you know what, I'm done with this, and stayed in prison, stayed in jail. He could have decided not to interpret the dreams that the people had, and could have stayed there and just given up. But he didn't. He walked in obedience to God, and because of that, he was able to help his family. And it says right there, the spirit of their father Jacob was revived. So when you walk in obedience to God, it can inspire other people to do the same. So what's obedience? Obedience is to hear God's word and act accordingly. True hearing or obedience involves the physical hearing that inspires the hearer in a belief or trust that in turn motivates the hearer to act in accordance with the speaker's desire. So you're doing what you hear. Okay? So your mama says, clean up your room, you clean it up. Teacher asks you to do something in class, and you do it. That's being obedient. Biblical obedience is to hear, trust, submit, and surrender to God and his word. This is really hard stuff to do. I'm just going to tell you. To walk in true obedience means you have to not only hear, but you have to trust and submit and surrender. Those are hard things for humans to do. So if you love me, you will keep my commandments. John 6, 2 John 6 says, and this is love, that we will walk according to his commandments. You walk in it from what you've heard. So maybe you're telling me tonight, like, I don't hear God. I've never heard God speak to me. Jeremiah 33:3 says, call to me and I will answer you and will tell you great and hidden things that you've not known. Psalm 119:105 says, your word is a lamp to my feet and a light to my path. So if you're not hearing from God, ask him Say, God, I want to hear from you. I need to hear from you. I am struggling with, you name it, whatever it is. I'm struggling with this thing that's going on in my family. I'm struggling with this friendship that I have at school, or the lack of friendship that I have at school. I'm struggling with school in general. I'm struggling with what the purpose of my life is. Ask him to show you those things. And how do you hear that? Through his word. His word is a lamp to your feet. What does that mean? If you put a flashlight down on the ground, why do you shine your flashlight to the ground while you're walking? So you can see. The word shows you where you're going. Gives you a light to your path. Okay? How many of you have a hard time trusting people? A lot of us do. The ones that don't have your hands raised are probably lying. Most of us have a hard time trusting people. But I want to tell you something. Because you have a hard time trusting people, sometimes you might have a hard time trusting God because you put those same expectations or same things that you expect him to act the same way as we do as people. I want to tell you this. I'm going to let you down. Believe it or not, Steve will let you down. Mr. Eric will let you down. Even Rachel will let you down. Tim, Tickle Me Tim will let you down. Andrew won't let us down. No. But all people, if you put your hope and your trust in people's ability to meet your standards, to meet everything that you're wanting them to do, they're going to fail. Why is that? You know why? We're all sinners. We said it earlier. We've all sinned. We're all subject to that fall. I have hang-ups. I have things that are, I deal with that are terrible. All of us do. But I want to tell you, Psalm 146:3 says, "Put not your trust in princes or in the Son of Man in whom there is no salvation." And Psalm 118:8 says it's better to take refuge in the Lord than to trust in man. Put your trust in God. He's not going to let you down. Last thing, how do I surrender? You've come to this place. What is it Steve likes to say? I'm glad you're here. I don't know how to surrender, God. I don't know. I'm going through all these different things in my life. I'm struggling. I don't understand why this is here. I have a hard time trusting. I don't hear from you. But seems like I need to surrender to understand what your plan is for me. Luke 9:23 gives us a start of how to do that. He said to all, "If anyone would come to me, let him deny himself and take up his cross daily and follow me." And Romans 10:13 says, "For everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved." So how do you surrender? You got to deny yourself. That's tough, y'all. I'm just going to tell you it's hard. But God is sufficient. His grace is sufficient to help you do that. So I think that's it. Okay. 2 last points. In the songs that we sang tonight, if you're struggling with something and you don't know how to pray, the songs that we started out with tonight are great starting points. Especially if you're going through some stuff. The first song, "You make all things work together for my good." Pray that. God, I know that you're working all things together for my good. Help me to see what that is. And the second song that I heard tonight that you can pray is that Christ would be magnified in you. So if you're a Christ follower, if you believe that Jesus is the way to salvation, that you want to have a relationship with him, and you believe that, ask for him to be magnified in your life. That does not mean that every day will be Friday. That means that God will be magnified in your life and people will see him working in your life, even through the hard times. So, like Steve said, my prayer for y'all is that not that you won't have hard times, But my prayer for you is that you come to this place to learn more about what God's doing in your life and how you can serve him and how you can honor him. Because the hard times are going to come, y'all. Maybe you're not having them right now, but I can tell you they will. Build your foundation now on him so that you can trust him and surrender to him.